Hi, this is Michael Dorgan. Here is the first half of an interview Sifu Justin Meehan of St. Louis did with me about Qigong and HunYuan Tai Chi.
I'm really excited, Mike. It's great to see you. You and I have known each other for a long time, haven't we, Mike?
We have. I mean, going back to what, the late 80s or
No,
mid
I,
80s.
I think the late 70s, because I went to China in 1981, and I think I knew you before then
Um,
through Gene O.
yeah, I'm trying to think of when we did go back that far. I'm trying to remember when met you through. I remember it was through Doctor O, and that might have been the very late '70s. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, because I used to go out and stay out there with her, and
right.
then we were always crossing paths,
Yeah,
one way
yeah.
or another. And I didn't realize that you was studying with Jean for 6 years. That's crazy. I didn't
Yeah,
know that. I don't know why I didn't know that.
yeah. Because I was studying with George Shu, and then George Shu started studying with him. So many of George Shu's students started studying with him. Yeah.
All right,
All
are we
right.
ready to roll? Everybody? Cash?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. I'm really excited.
Hi.
All right, so really excited to have my good friend uh, Michael Dorgan one-on-one today. Michael has been a long-term martial artist. He studied with Jack Man Wong from 1978 to 1984. Uh, he then studied with George Shu from 84 to 90. I mean, these are some serious people. He then studied with Master Zhang from 1990 to 1996. Then in 1989, he moved to China and he studied with Fung, Chen Style and Fung's daughter. In 2002, he became a disciple of Fung Zichang. And in 2003, he was actually in China as part of his job as a journalist. When his job was done in 2003, he decided to, hey, Mark, that you? Is that Mark? In 2003, his job was done. He stayed on for another year and a half just to continue his studies with Master Fung and Chen Xian. In 2007, he was named an honorary instructor of the Fung Zichang Martial Art Academy. And, today, right now in America, we really only have two Fung disciples, Yang Yang and Mike Dorgan. Zhang has left town. Mike and I go back a long time. We have crisscrossed each other's paths on so many different occasions. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was, George Shu is the guy who really introduced Master Zhang to America. He even gave up his own classes in order to allow Master Zhang to teach. And Mike studied with him for 6 years. So what was that like, Mike? Studying
Uh,
with Master Zhang?
Master Zhang or George Shu?
Zhang.
Oh, it was it was very good. I mean, I was up until then I had studied some Yang style Tai Chi, and with George Shu I had studied Xingyi, and I'd gone to China with George Shu. We in 1985 we spent 3 months
I
in
didn't know
China, and I studied there in Shanghai with Yu Hua Long, who was is an extraordinary Xingyi master. But during that stay, we went to Beijing, and that's where we first saw Master Fung, and we toured China and saw many masters, but Master Fung was the person George was most excited to see, and I think that's what then made him so eager to train with Zhang Shuixin when he showed up in San Francisco.
Let
Um,
me back up just a little
oh,
bit. The thing that you enjoyed studying with Master George Shu was Xingyi.
correct.
Now, I'm a little bit confused because, George spells it Xinyi. Fung does Xinyi, which is intention and spirit, intention and whatever,
Right.
or mind and intention.
Right.
But other people is form and intention, the HSING. Are they the same thing? Or?
They are not. There are many flavors of Xingyi, just as there are Taichi. So I think that an accurate answer would be to say fundamentally they are the same. The underlying theory and principles are very, very similar, but there's a different emphasis in different traditions.
Going back, so you met. How did you meet Master Zhang? Oh, through George.
Through George. So Master Zhang showed up in San Francisco around 1990. He may have been here a little earlier. I think he had a relative that he had been staying with in the East Bay, and then he started teaching. And George introduced many of his George's students to Master Zhang, and so we all began training with Master Zhang. Yeah.
Zhang is very technical, and he puts a lot of emphasis on Shina. More so, I think, than Fung.
I think, yeah, that's true. I mean, everybody had, the thing about Chen style, I mean, it's true actually of all complete systems, although many systems now have been, many of, I think, the original components have been stripped away. So many systems today are less than complete. But if you take any of the complete systems, they create a very big tent. So nobody is kind of equally accomplished across the whole spectrum of possibilities. So everybody I've ever met tends to have some emphasis, that reflects what they were taught or what their interest is, what their body size is, their temperament. Some people are into more grappling, some into, striking, like Master Fung was probably best known for his power, just that kind of killer punch. Others, neutralizing. So I think it becomes a reflection of, and also what their background is. So Master Zhang's background was different, and Master Feng's background was influenced from what he had learned, just like Chen Qiang's then background, influenced what he learned. So I think everybody becomes a synthesis of whatever it is they've experienced, inside martial arts and outside of it. So for sure there were differences.
Introduction to Master Fung when you went to China.
I'm sorry?
Who introduced you to Master Fung when you went to China?
Tony Wong, who had been a student of Master Zhang's, came through Beijing. I had just recently moved there as a foreign correspondent for Knight Ridder. And he introduced me to Feng Shouchen, who's Master Feng's daughter. And so I met her, and I started meeting her in the park, working out with her in Tiantan Park, and then she introduced me to her father.
She's great. I mean, you brought her to St. Louis. We love her. I mean, she's so feisty.
Yeah.
And the last time I was there, she was at Malcolm's place and doing a workshop. I still want to take a look at that film sometime.
Yeah.
But she's just such an enjoyable person. She's really fit. She's a boy girl. She really practices.
Yeah.
Most people, when their first encounter with Fung was that old black and white 1983, not that the 83 form.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? And then Gene Chen was selling it.
Mm-hmm.
People were shocked when you saw Fung doing the 83 on that black and white video. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure the specific one you're talking about, but I've seen very different certainly a lot of videos of him over a long spectrum of time, and
This is the
see the
only
differences.
one with him doing the entire 83 on it.
Right.
And it's very abrupt and, very martial.
Mm-hmm.
And then it seemed to evolve. Maybe in the late 80s, the whole emphasis was on the 48 form.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe in the 90s, it was the Hanyuan. I mean, and it went from very structured to very almost unstructured in terms of focus on technique and applications. Fung really has evolved over time. But at the same time, he created so many forms. I mean, he taught the 71, the 83, the 48, the 24, the 24 canon, the 30 canon. He's so many different forms. He loved the martial arts. He must have stayed up all night making up those forms. You studied all of those in China?
Yes, I learned pretty much all of them. Um, I didn't. This now is the image still on? I've got to, or is someone just signing
I
on?
can see you.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
So the only form I didn't learn was the staff set. He started teaching me that once, and then I got called out of China on a reporting assignment and was gone for quite a while, and it was just not convenient for him to like drag a big staff, to the park every day. So I did not learn that. I learned basic staff movements from him, but not the form. But pretty much all of the other forms.
the staff is quite. Master Zhang also had the staff. That pole was hard to pick up and then to shake it. I mean, I wouldn't even do it at my age anymore. It seemed like something you do it a little bit younger. So when you first met Master Fung, that was at one of his classes or where?
Um, it was, well, he didn't have a formal schedule. He would there were two or three different groups of students of his who taught classes, and he would show up sometimes at Tiantan Park, sometimes at Ditan Park, um, often unannounced, and depending on just how he felt. He was a very free spirit. So, but then he would show up, and then he would teach for a while. But he typically, he didn't teach daily classes in the park. And then after I met him, he started teaching me. So the instruction I had from him was mostly private. Although was often in the parks at places where he would show up at, because he had several students who were teaching classes in those parks, and so he would kind of drop in and visit them on a regular basis. So every day he went somewhere. But then also over the course of my 5.5 years in China, I could see the interest in HunYuan building, and more people would come into Beijing from other areas of China and from Japan, from the U.S. And elsewhere. So he became kind of increasingly in demand over that period, his time.
I mean, that's clear that, I mean, he had many, I mean, just like Chen Faka, he had many group classes, but only a few people really studied with him privately, including Fung.
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to study privately with Fung, I mean, he's kind of a character too. He's a fun guy to study from. There's one video on YouTube where he's teaching some young guy. It's at the same time the first 86 form. It's outside a wall, but you get a sense of his fun enthusiasm about teaching and his relaxed ability to just take you where you are and run with that. What were your private classes like?
They were, I mean, I was, well, first of all, I want to say I was very grateful that I had practiced several, most of those forms, had learned them from Zhang Shui Xin. So, because, Master Feng was, he was an extraordinary teacher, but he didn't want to waste a lot of his time. I mean, because some people come, they have absolutely no foundation, and then they'll expect the teacher to kind of sit there and lead them through all the movements, you know, where he would show it a couple of times and then turn and walk away, right? And you know, so it's old school. It's like the burden is much more on the student. You know, you show up, you hang out. Some days you might learn a lot, some days maybe not so much, but you be prepared, and then you take the responsibility for observing and for um, absorbing what the teacher shows. But because I had had that foundation, he could teach these sets to me quite quickly, which is why, partly why for sure he took the time to go through all of them with me, and so that was a great privilege. But the extraordinary thing about him as a teacher was he had this uncanny sense of what your level was and what your capability was, and so he would kind of each day show you, or when he was teaching me, he would like fill up my cup every day. I would learn as much as I could absorb, but then that was it. Because I think I learned a lot about teaching from him in that regard, and that you can err by giving too much information and material to a student too, because then they become overwhelmed and they don't know what to pay attention to, because so much of the learning process, early on I used to think, well, what's right and what's wrong, and is this real and is this not real? And then I came to realize that's not the process. The process, because there's so much material and there's so much information, and so it's important to manage your own practice by focusing on the things that are the most important. That's the thing that he emphasized over and over again. Because, go ahead.
The 83 is a very difficult form to learn, especially if that's your first form. Was he doing the 83 or the 48 with you?
Well, both. He started out with the 24, and then did the 48, and then all the Arlu sets. The 71 and the 32, 38, 46, 62, and then the two kind of special sets that you mentioned, and then the Ilu, the 83, yeah. But the thing is that with the Ilu, it's not, it has a very large number of repetitions. So the 24 is actually a brilliant abbreviation of the 83. I mean, because there are certain sequences in the 83 that are repeated 6 or 7 times. So
the only thing I feel about the 24 is it should have had cloud hands in it. But the 24 was designed to be done in 5 to 7 minutes, which was the requirement for people who are competing using Tai Chi. And so, while to me, if you can do the 24, if you can do the first half of the 24, that's Tai Chi. If you have the principles, it's really very difficult. You take something like the 83 and you've got these jump kicks and splits to really develop the principles. And I think Fung was more focused on principles than on choreography. How do you feel about that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, he would, if you have looked at a lot of his videos, you see how much his forms evolved. In fact, it was frustrating to some of Zhang Chuixin's students in the early 90s, because every year he would go to China and he would come back with a somewhat modified form, because that was in this period. And that's something you might want to talk about too, when you spoke of the difference from the early footage, when he did a kind of a much more I don't want to say physically explosive, more fudging, more stomping.
Talk about it, Michael. Talk about
Okay.
it.
Well, I think the sequence. I mean, if you look at the history, first Master Fung studied with Hu Yaozhen, and he already then was an accomplished martial artist, had learned several styles, and he studied intensively with Hu, and then was introduced to Chen Fa, trained with him, and then used those forms. In fact, at Hu's recommendation, because he thought that the system was good. So he learned those, and he focused on those. But then by the time he retired, which was when he was about 50, and so that would have been like some of those around the early 80s, right? Then he spent a full year just healing himself, because he worked in this factory. He'd been through the Cultural Revolution and all these difficult times, and where he had poor nutrition and bad air and hard working conditions. And so he told me several times that he was very ill by the time he retired, and he spent a full year in Tiantan Park healing himself with the gong that he had learned from Hu Yaozhen. And I think that's the point then, see, where I think he had learned all these things, but as a very young man, and he was still at that time very interested in the more martial side of the arts, even though he had absorbed these teachings. But again, there's a lot of material there, and even if you practice 7 hours a day, which he sometimes did, it's hard to practice everything equally. So, but at that point of his retirement, I think is when he really began to develop this sense of the internal power and the internal cultivation, and it was then that his forms started softening and becoming more round, and his training shifted to where he put greater emphasis on internal cultivation and the gong. Because the thing about Master Fung is he was almost agnostic about technique. I mean, he for sure enjoyed people seeing doing the form well, and but he didn't expect anybody to do a mere copy. And when he would observe and comment on somebody doing Tai Chi, it was always on the kind of internal quality of it and the quality of their practice, how they were practicing, as opposed to the externalities. Because sometimes he would change forms willy-nilly, or he would say, like you mentioned cloud hands. One time he told me, if you're doing it, this feels good, just do this 7 or 8 times, just keep doing it. So the thing is that some people, and I think this was something I really, one of the lessons I learned from being in China is here, a lot of, early on especially, you had Chinese martial arts introduced to Westerners, so we didn't have any idea what was going on, but we liked it and we were interested in it, right? So these forms would come in, and they were treated like sacred scrolls, right? Like the highest accomplishment is the most direct imitation that you can do. Remember these articles people used to, like in Tai Chi magazine, they would argue about the angle of Yang Chen Fu's toes, whether they were 55 degrees or 50 degrees, this kind of stuff. And this is going back to what I said, is like focusing on what's important and what's not, because a lot of people can train in internal martial arts, but in fact, they're training as if they're external martial arts, because they focus on externalities. They focus on the external details,
And
So,
I want to ask you about that. I just want to back up a little bit. Master Fung, Chen Fa was in Beijing from 1928 until he died in 1957. That was a very tough time. That was the warlords. It was almost lawless. Master Fung was born in 1928 when Chen Fa went to Beijing. Fung studied with Chen Faka maybe 7 years, from 1950 to 57. What was interesting is he started with Huyo Zhen in 1948 when he was 20,
Mm-hmm.
and Huyo Zhen didn't die until 1973.
Mm-hmm.
So he may have even had more time with Huyo Zhen than Chen Faka in a way.
Right.
Why
Yeah.
don't we hear more about Huyo Zhen? I mean,
Well,
if he
okay,
is,
I'll tell you, here's something that's telling. Okay, because Chen Fa Ke is a much is a better known figure like today in martial arts circles, certainly in the United States. And he was an extraordinary martial artist and the standard bearer of Chen style. But the way that Master Feng put it is Chen Fa Ke was a Kung Fu saint. Hu Yao Zhen was a Kung Fu god. That's how he put it. So
well,
you,
Chen Faka was real. He fought. He actually fought using the arts and using cold weapons. I think there's a big story about him and the Red Spears.
yeah,
But Chen Faka was a real warrior monster. I mean,
yeah,
and he started late in life. He had been kind of spoiled growing up, and it wasn't until he heard people saying, "Oh, isn't it a shame?" that he started getting up in the middle of the night. Things my mother had. But why don't we hear more about Huyo Zhen? We hear a little bit about his Qigong, but I mean, if he was such an exceptional martial artist, there's so little other people don't talk about him that much.
yeah. Well, I think because he kept a lower profile, although he and Chen Fa Ke were respectively. I mean, Chen Fa Ke was president, he the vice president of the Beijing Martial Arts Society, which was the
And I did eventually find a photograph of the two together. I
right.
didn't see them.
But he was a brilliant scholar. He was a Chinese, a traditional Chinese doctor, but also a Qigong master. Some people referred to him as the father of modern Qigong because he codified a lot of these ancient exercises. He also, I've been told, opened the first Qigong clinic in Beijing. So
He had to get through the Red Guards on that one. He had to convince them that he wasn't celebrating the old. He was using the old to celebrate the new.
right, right. So anyway, and he had trained in many martial arts, but and his dominant style was Xingyi. But he was not. He wasn't as martially oriented as Chen Fa Ke for sure, and he was very, I think, exacting. I don't think he took many students, and he would not teach people if he thought they were just going to be bullies or ruffians and this. So his orientation, I think, was much more internal. That said, he had extraordinary powers. He was sometimes called, one finger, who one finger conquers the world, Yao Zhen. And Master Fung, told this great story. You may have heard it about him meeting him. I don't. Do you want me to tell that or?
Yeah. We
Okay. Yeah. So he's Master Fung. Had come from a martial arts family. His grandfather had been a very accomplished archer and horseman, and was essentially like equivalent of a constable. And he had started training, I think, with an uncle very early. He was 6 or 8 years old. Had learned Dongbei and several other systems. And in Hubei province, then had moved to Beijing when he was young. He was like maybe 12 years old. Apprenticed him, got an apprenticeship in an electric motor factory, and had continued to train. And he could, instead of lift, 300-pound stones, he could, smash 4 or 5 bricks and rocks with his hands. So he was a kind of a very powerful martial guy. And he had heard of Hu Yaozhen, this famous martial artist in Beijing, and but didn't know how to meet him. And then finally met someone who had some connection to him, who introduced him. And Fung said when he first saw Hu Yaozhen, he was kind of disappointed because he said the guy didn't look formidable at all, and he said he looked almost delicate, and so Hu said, show me what you do. And so Fung said he said he was very proud in those days, and he would, he ripped off this form with lots of power, and Hu told him, "You're destroying your body," and so then Hu said, "Hit me," and so Fung said he was hesitant because he thought he would just kill the guy. And finally Hu said, hit me, give me, show me what you got. And so he said he threw a very powerful punch at his stomach, and just it was like hitting a tire. I mean, there was nothing solid, and then suddenly there was this tremendous pressure, and you just got blown back several yards onto the ground. And then he got up, and then Hu said, "Now it's my turn," and came and just like hit him with one finger, boom, in the chest, and he just blasted him. And he said it was like nothing he had ever felt before. It was like a big electrical charge. And so then he, begged to become his student. So that was how he was introduced to Hu Yaozhen. So.
Well, Fung was in San Francisco, I think 2001, and he gave some wonderful lectures. I think copies of it is up on you were also teaching in San Francisco with Malcolm. Yeah, it's on Malcolm's website.
Okay.
Fung said he actually observed Hu Yaozhen levitate. I'll just leave it like that.
Yeah.
Michael, give us an idea of what you think the essential ingredients are of Master Fung's art that people can benefit from. And I mean, this guy is recognized as a world-class master. It wasn't just the technique, because everybody was doing the same form. What made his technique special?
His technique, or the whole system, HunYuan
The whole
system.
Try his ability.
Okay. Well, first his ability. Okay, he has, people talk about the kind of three levels: obvious power, hidden power, kind of mysterious power, or whatever. He was the first person I'd ever met who truly had this level that was of a different kind. It was not simply more like his punch or whatever. I think that it was. They talk about. He talked often, about this sequence, right? The E leads the chi leads the body does the technique, right? So that implies a sequence. But then there's a level too of what they call Yi Dao, Qi Dao, Li Dao, Feng Fa Dao, which is your mind, your chi, your body, and your technique all arrive at the same time. It's like there's a collapse of that sequence. And that's the closest thing I've been able to kind of to come up with, to kind of explain that sense, which is to say, like, if you're pushing hands with him, there was this penetration, of his E, so that when you would just think to do something, it would be jammed, it would be blocked, it would be smothered. There's this notion they talk about of sometimes of covering and swallowing. It was like that, like your energy can't come out. And sometimes I'd be doing things where he would show a move like a boom, and then do it a second time. Okay, so now I know exactly what he's going to do, and he would still do it, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And it wasn't the blinding speed, I mean, so it was not based on physical strength, twitch muscles, and it was, I think, beyond chi. I think it goes. There is, we work on cultivating the chi, expressing the chi, and the true level of mastery in Master Fung's, what he described as the level of mastery is, Ili Hunyuan Chen, Ili Hunyuan Qi, which is that, like, one crystal or one pellet of chi, right? That is the mark of a high level. So I don't know if it's exactly at that level or at the next notch, where it's almost as if it goes beyond chi to just mind. And but anyway, it was extraordinary. So
Michael,
yeah.
you're a lifelong martial artist. Now, you studied with Jack Man Wong, you studied with Jean. You are a born and bred martial artist. What was different about Fung's ability or teachings? How did you benefit from Fung's teachings? What changed? I mean, you studied every martial art, and you are a martial artist.
Yeah, the thing that I think is special is the completeness of the training. Most systems that I've experienced, and these are not intrinsic shortcomings of the systems, but as they are taught, there are kind of big gaps. So I would find people are talking about things, but how do you do it? How do you get there? What's the step-by-step process? And the thing about HunYuan that I think is so extraordinary, like I say, is its completeness. And you've got the gong, you've got the forms, you've got the two-person trainings, you've got the weapons, you've got body conditioning. So people can give it a different emphasis, but basically everything is there, all the material is there. And then also the thing and this was transformative for me, which was emphasis. And again, it's like people can spend their whole lifetimes refining the the external details of the form, because there's a lot there. There are a lot of different postures, and Master Fung used to talk about that a lot. But he said, if people do that, people can do the form for 20 years and never get any internal power. So the key to him was internal cultivation. So when he talked about practice, he talked about 70% of your practice should be gong, 70% of your gong should be standing. Zhangzhuang, right? Wow. So now, when I was in China, I still wasn't practicing in those proportions because I was learning. So you have to kind of factor that in too. If you're taking a class, well, you have to manage your practice and refine the movements, practice. Yeah, and you do a job, do all of that kind of stuff. But everyone, I think, would benefit greatly by trying to shift their practice more and more toward the gong, because it really is the essence of it.
It's very difficult to understand from a practical martial point of view. Now I know you gave a wonderful interview with Ken Goulet, and I want people to, if they get a chance, to make an effort to get that. It's the website is Internal Martial Arts with Ken Goulet, and you spent a lot of time talking about the difference between the external and the internal. And it made a lot of sense to me. You were saying that the emphasis was more on energy and intention. Was that it?
Yes, I think the thing too is these aren't discrete categories. So you have hundreds of Chinese martial arts, and they're along a spectrum. So some are more internal, some are more external, but but they're not like mutually exclusive. But if you think of the main elements that were the ones I mentioned: mind, energy, body, technique. Okay, so that's the sequence. You need to develop and refine all of those dimensions. But generally the distinction would be that external styles focus on the last two, which is technique and body. So it's like stretching, fitness, strength, refining technique. Internal systems focus more on mind and energy. Now, while doing that, they also have to refine the technique and have good technique, because the thing about the emphasis on internal gong, well, you can have tremendous internal cultivation, but if you don't practice the martial expression of that, it's not going to come out in a martial way. I mean, I'm sure there are lots and lots of monks, who have tremendous chi cultivation, but they have no interest or practice that gives that a martial expression. So it's a matter of emphasis.
Tai Chi is not necessarily, especially today, limited to a martial ability. I mean, health is probably the biggest reason people study Tai Chi today, and then maybe go one step beyond spiritual, Taoist cultivation, self-cultivation, and so forth. But as a martial artist from America, experiencing what you did with Master Fung, and I've also pushed with him, it's just incredible. And I don't pat it. I'm not trying to make it seem more than it was, but it was extraordinary. His ability to touch, just to brush and to mislead you, and to always you're pushing against the clouds when you're pushing him.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're on the other side of the room and you're both laughing. That's what he said. He said, "Look, both people laugh." And you're studying with George Shu, and well, I guess Zhang prepared you a lot for Master Fung. But the internal aspect, from a martial perspective, what was the difference? How did it change your art, and what did you accomplish by it?
It changed it a lot, but going back to the combination, you're talking about the martial arts and the internal cultivation, is like it's a matter of progress. I think, like, someone starts out learning martial arts, and in fact you can make quicker initial progress, I think, practicing an external style, a good tough external style, and for several years you can make very good progress. But then you reach a point where you have to work harder and harder for smaller increments of improvement. So the refinement of technique and the increased flexibility, increased strength, and fitness, and all this, you kind of hit a wall. I mean, where you have to work harder and harder for smaller increments, and then when you reach middle age or less, actually, then you have to work harder and harder to just keep from losing more and more of it. So one of the a very common pattern like Master Fung followed, and Chen Qiang also to some degree, was start out with kind of more physical external systems, and then if they want to continue to progress, then they come to realize, the only way I can do this is with mind and energy, because those are open ended, and there really is no real limit to those.
And you indicated that practice of the Qigong and the Chan Chen and the Fang Sun were all ways to practice mind and energy without having to necessarily be focused on martial choreography.
That's true, but on the other hand, if you look at the Chan Qigong, and it's true of a lot of the Fang Gong too, and of a lot of the Qigong, but especially the Chan Qigong. Those are the kind of fundamental body mechanics. So when you practice those as a gong, then you're focusing on quieting the mind and cultivating the energy, and with Chan Qigong particularly kind of moving the energy right from the dantian out to the extremities and different channels and pathways. So that's the focus of attention. So you're not thinking, oh, when I'm doing this, I'm smashing a guy in the head with my palm. But in fact, when you look at those, and when you practice those, you realize those are the fundamental body mechanics from the form, and the technique. The form is the embodiment of the technique, right? And so you are practicing the body mechanics, and you are practicing the technique at its deepest, most fundamental level. So it's not, some people think of the gong as ancillary, well, I'm doing martial arts and then I'll do a little qigong. It's like kind of like eating, like having a good diet, right? It's kind of helpful but not directly related. But that is not how Master Fung saw it at all. He really saw it as foundational for both health and martial art. And that's another thing you talk about HunYuan. I mean, what's I think terrific about it is the seamlessness of those benefits. Whereas there definitely are martial arts, like Hu Yaozhen told him, you're destroying your body. And the thing is, he would agree, that there are things you can do in terms of, people confuse like fitness and health and well-being. It all gets bundled together. So sometimes they think, well, whatever you do, it's all good. But in fact, certain things you can do when you're young and strong. So you take a 12, 15, 18-year-old person, and they can really inflict a lot of, do very vigorous training and build up strength. If they keep training in that exact same way, they'll tear down strength. It's just like people doing physical labor. It's the same thing, right? So people have to be smart about how they train. And the thing is, there's a point, and it's like, depends on, for most people it would be in their 30s or whatever, when, if they're a serious athlete, for sure they're going to notice that they kind of just natural, physical qualities start to erode.
So what do you say is the benefit of studying Tai Chi today? I mean, obviously, people aren't going to get into UFC after studying, nor should they with Tai Chi. Who wants to do that?
Yeah.
But why do you practice, and what do you tell your students about the benefit of practice and why they should continue?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it is a big tent, so I think that there is room for different interests. But the obvious there has been an extraordinary amount of research now into Tai Chi and the health benefits related to it. Although many of those studies are very superficial. I mean, they'll take a group of elderly people and then run them through a 12-week course and then show some improvement in balance or, lowering the blood pressure, whatever, which are meaningful. But there's been very little research on more advanced levels. But so there are, I think, indisputably very significant health benefits.
I think Ken Cohen wrote a wonderful article on Hanyuan Qigong. I forget what magazine it was in, but it should be available. He said that Hanyuan could even improve Yuan Qi. So Yuan Qi is like you get from your mother and father, how tall you're going to be, all that other stuff. The after Qi is what you develop by your food you eat, the air you breathe, the exercise you do. The idea that you could improve your inherited Qi is really extraordinary, and that's what he claimed about the Hanyuan Qigong.
Yeah. So that, I think, and the thing is, if you're interested in martial arts too, I mean, the thing is, you have to have that foundation in health, because if you don't have that, then that's going to erode too. So for people who are interested in martial arts, and I think that that was kind of my entry point. I started out, I was a young person, doing karate and taekwondo and all that, and it was purely for the martial benefits. I couldn't imagine getting old and frail, but even if that's your interest, well, the gong serves both those purposes. In fact, and the forms and the technique and all that too. Now, the thing is, if you want to become martially proficient, then you have to train those aspects, and if you don't train those, you won't have those abilities. But so again, people, I think so there are those two levels, the health benefits, the martial benefits. For some people, the aesthetics of moving, just like people are attracted to dance or other kinds of movement, it has that quality. And I do believe too that there is a genuine spiritual benefit, and I don't mean that in any denominational way. Tai Chi does not require any kind of a embrace of any kind of doctrine, but I think that there is inevitably, if you practice deeply, and because increasingly as you develop, the focus is on the mind, and specifically quieting the mind, because the mind is orchestrating everything that's going on. And so by eliminating the kind of distractions, then you can be much more proficient in the movement. But there's another benefit to that too, which is you start out like just doing Zhangzhuang, when you try standing and you're standing for 1 minute, 2 minutes, and your head is just noisy with this hum of thoughts bubbling up, about everything, from old tape loops of mommy daddy stuff to what are you going to have for lunch to how am I going to pay my rent to, it's endless. And as you persist, which is to say, you don't engage those thoughts, you just let them go. Well, over time, they start bubbling up less frequently. And that's the only way, when you cut down that monkey mind, that chatter, that you can access these other aspects of mind. The foremost, or the first thing you encounter is that the mind of just awareness,
And
just
Lance
awareness.
talked about the importance of eliminating 5 distractions and going within in order to find what you're looking for.
Right, and that is, I think, intrinsically spiritual, in the sense that all that noise in your mind, all these thoughts that bubble up, there's an agenda there. They're all related to your ego. They're about something you want, or something you fear, or something you crave, or something you regret, or something about you. So it's the little me, like, hey, pay attention to me. As that quiets down, then there's this field of awareness that is just without an agenda, it is just there. That's the point.
Is that the base? Is that the number one basis for practicing standing? I mean, for me as a martial artist, I can hardly justify. Hanyuan said he would stand for 2 hours
Yeah.
before he would meet Master Fung.
Yeah.
And Master Fung has always talked about standing. You don't see too much of it or anything, but what is the benefit of standing, let's say, for an hour?
Well, there too, I think that there are many levels of benefit. And the single, foremost one, again, goes to relaxation. So there too, that is always the guidance Master Fung would give people at every level. Relax more, relax more. He was speaking about physically relaxing, but also quieting the mind, because the mind and body are a continuum. So you can, have input at both ends. But the point is, you need to relax. You need to relax. And at a physical level, what you need to do is relax the tissues and align yourself with gravity so that the qi can drain down and pool at your middle dantian. Because until that process starts, you don't have anything to work with. And if you are, wherever you are tense, you're blocking the movement of qi. So part of it is physically relaxing. And again, the mind and body go hand in hand throughout this whole process. So that is foremost what you're trying to do. And as you relax more and more and more, your mind has simply one very muted instruction, which is stand here, right? Because if that's not there, you would just fall over. But you're standing and you're relaxing. So over time, you start to notice that it's like you're standing on the deck of a boat, because you're not standing in a military sense of like by locking your muscles, right? Which you could describe as using force to stand. You're relaxing. And then when you relax, then, you're stacked on ball joints. So everything just starts rolling a little bit. And then when your posture gets out of alignment, it's gently pulled back, by the small muscles and sinews around the joints. So, and as you're
unity between structure and gravity.
I'm sorry?
Creating the unity between
Yes,
structure and gravity.
absolutely. And what that's doing too then is you start developing root, right? Because when you're aligned, you're rooted. So you're just letting the heavy, you imagine like the body is falling to the feet until you're like one of those dolls that's, weighted at the bottom and can flop like that, right? So
Fung doesn't just use static standing. He also has slight movement during standing.
yeah, now almost always when Master Fung stood, he rocked from foot to foot.
Yeah.
It's like in one of the gongs, which is yin yang balancing, is doing that. So that that's absolutely fine. But the thing is, like I say, even when it's static, it's physically actually dynamic. I mean, an observer might not notice that, but you're always in motion because you start out with your weight essentially evenly distributed around your feet, although you want it to favor the front of the foot a little bit. You don't want too much weight on the heels. And then as you relax more and more, then you notice that your weight is shifting, but you keep it within, certain parameters because you want to stay erect. So you just intervene only enough to maintain that posture. So you are physically relaxing, you're quieting the mind, you're developing the root, you're strengthening the legs and the waist, and you're also developing the correct posture, because there are subtle aspects to like the pitch of the pelvis and that are difficult initially for people because they can't feel it. One of the things you notice when people start doing the gong is how they tend to be frozen, from the navel to the thigh, right? It's all like one unit, and the shoulders are all tight in this. So part of it is like thawing those sections of the body out so that they can be articulated and relaxed, and only when that has happened, then can they be organized into compliance with this principle. One thing moves, everything moves.
And
One thing stops, everything stops.
some people just focus on almost frozen alignment. If
Yeah.
everything is relaxed on the outside, then the chi is moving on the inside, which is what I think that Fung was exhibiting
Yeah.
when you would see movement in his form, certain types of his form and his standing.
Yeah, if it's locked, it's not right. Because that means you've got like the muscles locked up. That's not what you want. Hi, this is Michael Dorgan. Here is the second half of an interview Sifu Justin Meehan of St. Louis did with me about Qigong and HunYuan Tai Chi.
Mike, I'm going to ask two more questions, then I'm going to open it up and give it to everybody else. The second question is going to be, Michael, you have studied for a long time. You have traveled far. You have spent your life studying the art. What do you want to share with us? But that's the second question. The first question is a little bit different. Mike, you and I mean, the whole world knows if you're studying with Fung, softer is better than harder. And to practice push hands softly. When I was in China in 2011, I had one of my students who actually won the women's push hand. I have never seen worse push hands in my entire life. The only thing they didn't do is put boxing gloves on so that people wouldn't have to waste their time feeling anything. There was no connection. There was no practice of Hung circle. It was just go. How can that be from Master Fung? I mean, how can they even tolerate that? It's the opposite of what Fung is. I've never seen Fung do.
Do you want me to answer? Yeah. He does not, or he did not endorse that kind of pushing hands. So, in fact, he had, I think it's fair to say, almost no interest in like the whole concept of competitive push hands, because for him it was a training method. So I don't know how that all that got organized. But the thing is, I think what you saw is inevitable at a very early stage. It's what people do when they don't know how to move in compliance with the principles of Tai Chi.
It seems to me if it's Fung school, the opposite should be true. Who can be softer? Who can be more continuous? It seems to me the only person who really got Master Fung, present company excluded, of course, superiority in push hands is Chen Xian.
Mm-hmm.
And Chen Xian has created his own way of doing HunYuan. It's not carbon copy, a cookie cutter stamp. He has his own variation, but he manages to capture no matter how big he is, he's never using his body to overcome you. It's so soft, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think I'm sure everybody got a little something, but I would think that Chen Xian is the one guy who inherited the push hands, and it's so totally different from the way people practice push hands, especially competitively. I don't even know how you can, it would probably be counterproductive to practice like that.
Well, it is. In fact, when I was in the park and people would come and, because especially I was a foreigner and so people wanted to, try me out and all this. And with Master Fung, like if somebody was it had gotten to this point where it was really kind of a modified fighting, where Master Fung would just say, don't, don't, like you're wasting your time doing that. So and Chen Xiang is the same way. They said, it's a cooperative exercise. That's why the whole concept, and both of them, I mean, neither of them has any interest in competitive push hands. So I would say that it's kind of flawed at the start, because if you're going to have a competition, guess what? People, and if people get points for pushing people out of a circle, they're going to try to push them out of the circle any way they can. So it's, now how that came to be at that event, because it was Master Fung's event, well, Master Fung was a little like Frank Sinatra. I mean, he was the chairman of the board. So he didn't, he didn't set up the details on this. He was just doing what he did. And
I was trying to get the rules of the push hands,
yeah.
And I kept asking for, well, what are the rules going to be? And it wasn't until we got there, we had the night before training, and the new rule was, well, if it gets too intense and you feel there's a likelihood of injury, you can withdraw without any.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to tell my student, you're going to be doing push hands. You're going to do soft. I was shocked. It was like rollerball.
Well, no, but you know what though? Here's what I would say. The one thing I could say in defense of that is, I think everybody who's interested in martial arts needs a taste of that. Everybody in martial arts needs to go out and put their stuff up against somebody who is going to do their damnedest to not let them. It's because that's a very rudimentary stage, but it's a stage, and to feel what it's like to get punched, and to and feel that the frustration and all this, but so I think, like I say, some of that, there is that benefit, but in terms of an ongoing practice, you're wasting your time,
And I saw that, Mike, you have some great, you have a great website. You've got articles. You've got some extraordinary videos, especially that workshop you had. You had everybody in San Francisco: Brian Fung, Anthony Chen, guys from John's. It was a wonderful with Chen Xian. I urge people to go to Michael's website and take a look at the videos of Chen Xian, because he starts with push hands, but he goes beyond it. The two-person exercises on the Ba Fa were very interesting, I thought. Mm-hmm. And his way of bridging the gap and his entry, they always come in on an indirect angle from the outside in order to avoid facing the center line. Yeah. But I know that everybody wants to talk. I mean, I could carry on like this all day, Michael. But I want to give everybody else a chance to jump in. But before we conclude, and this doesn't mean that we're not going to do this again, because I really want to mine the wealth of your experience. I thank you as a martial artist, a true martial artist in the Chinese martial arts, for having traveled so far, having spent so much, having given up so much, having invested yourself, and having brought it back. Thank you. You're like an astronaut, in my opinion. And I really feel that nobody has really explained. I mean, Yang is, first of all, Yan's book, The Art of Tai Chi, should be everybody's first book. It's wonderful. It's extraordinary. And when I was in China, Master Fung only talked about two people, Yang and Zhang Shuixing. These were the only people he would talk about in terms of, if you need to know something or you need to do something. Yan's book is incredible, and he really carried the, Fung. Last time I saw him, he was saying, remember, Hanyuan is a gift of the Chinese people for the betterment of the world. And Yang has certainly done that, as well as yourself. But as a valued resource, I'm going to give you some time. You've answered all my questions. Tell me what you want people to understand, and that please.
About Tai Chi? Or
speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I was responding to your question. You mean like what guidance I could offer people in their practice? Yeah. Okay. I would say the things we've been talking about, which is to say, the Tai Chi is an internal martial art, and the that does not mean that you neglect the technique and external aspects, but the main focus of your practice, should be nurturing the chi, cultivating the chi, and that is, the heart and soul of it. So, and in terms of practice, I think I can't top Master Fung's guidance. 70% gong, and in terms of quality of practice, and this is the thing too, where it's people who are earlier in their practice, they're very kind of eager to learn more, and they confuse quantity with quality. And everyone who's serious at some point then circles back and just works on the basics, because it really isn't a matter of how many techniques you use. And in fact, it's a higher quality of practice to, in any one session, to do fewer things but with more repetitions. And that's how Master Fung encouraged people to train. Now, you still have to cycle through all the material so that you don't forget it. But it really is a matter of quality rather than quantity. And so that's, I think, the key thing. And I say that as someone who spent decades kind of heading in the wrong direction in that sense. I very eager to learn as much as I could, and so um, I made that mistake. I could have progressed, I realize now, much faster by learning less, but focusing on the most important things.
Well, I mean, just like Bruce Lee says, first, when you say in martial arts, a punch is just a punch. And after you get into it, there's this punch, there's that punch, and you're in a forest of punches.
Right.
When you finally get it, you come back, a punch is just a punch.
Yeah.
And I think that's extraordinarily, I mean, that, that because as a martial artist, you went through the forest, you had to find your own paths. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. But ultimately, if you've been a martial artist your whole life and a spiritual warrior, you're going to come back to this center in the beginning, where there is no confusion, there's no everything is just natural. I mean, the thing is, you have to think, especially in a fight, you have to think about anything, you're on the floor.
Yeah.
If you're not spontaneous, natural, it just doesn't add up. But Mike, I'm going to give other people a crack, because I'll come back. I mean, I can take up a whole nother hour. The thing I want to talk about was shaking, but we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
You guys want to jump in? Do you have things that you'd like to ask Mike? Come on.
I have two questions.
Who's that?
Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. I have two questions. One is, I didn't start out being martial and then going internal. So I've always felt like there's that's sort of like a detriment. So is there anything you can say to that? I feel like there's somehow, it's like then there's like a whole realm that I can't draw on.
One of the things I want to say is, remember, Fung had 4 daughters. His teaching was, Liang Shaoyu is another guy, all daughters. He really opened the art up to women. But Michael, go ahead.
I think, experience, I believe, can go 2 ways. There are some people who I believe are handicapped by their experience because they have settled on a certain understanding. It's this idea of like, you can't fill a cup that's already full, right? So they lock into certain thoughts, certain practices, and so they're not open to new instruction, right? So experience is not always a benefit. Like I say, it can be a handicap. That said, it can also be a benefit if somebody is open and can build on it and draw from it. But I don't think you should at all feel disadvantaged, because from not having that, because any of that experience that you want, in terms of the types of practices that are available within HunYuan. If you're interested in martial arts, then you can practice the push hands. There are two-person drills, body conditioning. So so you are not necessarily at a deficit for not having that experience.
The second question is, I understand you're working on a book, and I wonder if that's going to come up.
Yeah. Come on, Mike.
Well, I am, but I don't. I just want to kind of it's not like I'm on a clear schedule. I can't. If you're asking
You're a
when.
Writer. You're a writer.
I know, that's why I'm saying this, because but I am working on a book, and I'll definitely let everybody know when it's ready to
Post
launch.
a chapter.
Pardon?
Post a chapter on your website.
I really want to have the whole thing in pretty good shape. And
What's the deadline? What's the deadline?
well, I don't. That's it. I don't have one. So that has for sure slowed it down. But I am working along on it, and I want to pick up the speed and get that done within the year, I hope.
Looking forward to it.
All right, great.
Do any YouTube seminars, Michael, where you talk about techniques or things like that?
No.
Anybody else want to say something? Come on, jump in. All right, so I will. All right, Michael, Fung, when I first studied with Fung in 1981, he did have shaking in certain movements. As time went on, he corrected people and said, there's too much shaking. It's going to scramble your brains and everything else. In an interview with Jarek Simak, I forget the name of it, Fung was saying there is a shaking, but the best guys have the minimalist shaking. I often remember HunYuan when I was in his class. He would take one technique and they practice it maybe 9 times soft, 1 time hard, but primarily because he was concerned about the health of the internal organs and not doing anything that was going to disrupt that. But the idea of shaking isn't absent whatsoever, but nobody talks about it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make sure there are two different things you're talking about. I mean, one is fa jin and one is shaking. Are you using those separate? Yeah. Okay, so shaking, there are movements that do involve shaking, but Master Fung said most people do them incorrectly. And what happens then is, because the thing is, you want to release all the force that you're generating. And so if you're generating a lot of force in shaking, but only releasing 70-80% of it, that other 20-30% is going to be tearing at your joints and your organs. So that was his concern with that. So the quality, that's why you have to be completely relaxed, because like when people are holding tension in their body, then especially if they do a shaking movement and then there are blockages, and then that shaking, like I say, ends up expressing force against your own tissues and joints, and so it can be very damaging. Now, Fa Jing, you could say in some sense there's a kind of a shaking, there's a vibrational quality to Fa Jing, which is like releasing energy. So Master Fung's thoughts on that, I mean, a very simple way to think of it is like when you are practicing slowly, you are gathering energy. When you're fa jing, which is releasing energy, it's like, so he said sometimes it's like you're saving your money when you're practicing slowly. When when you fa jing, you're spending your money. So you need to know, if you're interested in certainly any martial applications, you have to know how to fa jing, how to release energy, and you have to do that. But you do it sparingly because there is an expenditure of energy. And then once that ability in different techniques is developed and refined, then you don't have to do it very often. And so he didn't. But
what I found was in practicing the form, it's sometimes like building a snowman. You're rolling it, it gets bigger, 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 and then you settle it back down again. And you start it bigger, 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 bigger. And so at a certain point, you want to just release it and go back to the beginning again.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like sometimes too, you vary the speeds. So Master Fung said, generally slower is better because the slower you go, the more opportunity you have to monitor what you're doing, to bring things into alignment, to make the adjustments and corrections you need to make, and you're conserving your energy. And increasingly, as the form becomes more and more gong-like, you're gathering the energy. But he also encouraged mixing up the speed. So you do mostly slow, but then sometimes it's good to do your form faster. And it's fine too, like in the course of a form, to issue power on certain movements. But it should be done judiciously, and that depends on your level of fitness and energy, and also your technique, because your technique should be good, because the sloppier your technique is, the more of that issue of like shaking, which is to say that the force that you generate is not going out, because when you express energy, you want it to go out. So if you're just shaking, rattling your own joints, that's not good.
Michael, Master Fung talked about women. Do you find that there are differences in the way a woman should practice rather than a man? I now notice that there's the women, especially Fung's daughter, are now opening the heart chakra. In other words, it used to be, upper, middle, and the lower.
Yeah.
Now it just seems natural that women would express through the heart. But do you find that there are any things that people have to consider? Is there differences between how a man and a woman should practice?
The only specific difference in training was in the gong, the circling the dantian, the 36 circles, one way, 24, going small to large, large to small. The directions are reversed for men and women. But that's the only, technical, difference in training, the only between men and women. And I think this has more to do with culture than anything else, or interests or whatever. It was more common for men to be more interested in in the martial aspects, but not entirely. I mean, there were a number of women I met who were very accomplished in push hands and that, so it was more a reflection of their own interests.
Chen Fako was saying the only person who understood the straight sword was his daughter. But I mean, Master Fung has had a lot of women, great women.
Yeah.
His daughters, particularly, are our friend, wonderful, absolutely great. Madame Gao, Nick, you went out to Washington, Madame Gao.
Mm-hmm.
He's had some extraordinary women, and women hold up half the sky, and they are the administrative heads of the Hanyuan system.
Yeah.
I don't know why the website is only in Chinese now. It used to be Chinese and English. Seems like they've shrunk to just China now.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
When you circle the dantian, you put your right hand on top of the left hand on top of the right hand. Is it different between men and women?
Um, Left over right. But it's one of those things. Like a lot of times when Master Fung would do it, his hands weren't overlapped.
Yeah.
Be like this. So that's one of those things I think that's yeah, not a hugely important detail.
Michael, do you know why there's a different man, woman, and hand position?
You
What's the
know,
reason
I
behind?
don't. I asked that, and I couldn't under. My Chinese wasn't good enough to understand it, but it had something to do with the way that the energy circulates in women. In fact, the whole thing of the dantians is somewhat confusing because in Hunyuan, upper dantian, middle dantian at the just below the navel, and then the way in the lower dantian, which is like the perineum, where in some systems they describe the what we call the middle dantian as the lower dantian, and I I did hear Master Fung say once like that in women like he emphasized the importance of the heart chakra, but I don't know how that related to the circling, you know.
Okay, wait a
So
minute. The now they are practicing open and closing the heart, and I think that's
yeah,
essential because women start chi in their heart the same way men start in their dantian.
mm-hmm.
But what I finally figured out was which is the left hand and the right hand. It's like a yin yang sandwich. If you're a man, you're yang. The right is the yin, the left is the yang. So you got a sandwich. I sometimes find it easier to put the right over the left because I think the right is yang, the left is yin, and the dantian is who you are.
Yeah.
But that's just my own personal study. One of the other ladies, I think, Patricia, were you going to say who? Anybody? Yeah, go.
Yeah, a comment on that, and then I have a question. But I think Sharon, when she was here, that's Master Feng's daughter,
Right.
mentioned that there was specific qigong for men and specific qigong for women. So
As well as Master Fung taught, I'm saying in his whole system of in Hunyuan, which is the gong, the forms, weapons, this the only um, the only thing that was practiced or taught to be done differently by women than men is that circling action. Now Shouqian is very interested in teaching gong to women, so what she's doing, and this is a thing too. See, like this is a living art, right? And so she is developing and expanding on certain aspects of that Master Fung didn't necessarily practice, right? And so, and she's learned some things from other sources too. So I think that, and she's particularly, interested in working with women on that. So there, and in certain health practices and that, I would assume that there, could be significant differences. What I was speaking of was in the context of the Hunyuan system that Master Fung developed.
Sometimes I feel like the men are so patrilineal, they only accept information that's been handed down from man to man. Whereas the woman is so intuitive. If you read the article on Malcolm's, the interview with Fung on Malcolm's website, someone asked Fung's daughter about the difference in practice and so forth. And I feel there is a difference in practice, but I don't always feel that men get it. The one thing Fung said is women get the Qigong right away because they're used to moving inside the body and being aware of that, whereas the men are so locked up and rigid. Sometimes takes a while to let go in order to understand it. But I do believe that women have a greater intuitive understanding of what works, what's real, what fits, than sometimes men, where we're so confined that this is what my teacher said, this is what his teacher said. as opposed to understanding it experientially.
There's a lot of yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ego and machismo in there too, you know, because especially in martial arts, where um, you know, so there's a lot of that kind of attitude that does interfere with like what you mentioned. I mean, I think that women can progress initially often quicker because they're not as invested. I mean, you know, it's hard to be a man and not be heavily invested in strength, right? And conventional strength is all about locking your bones into a rigid structure with your muscles, and the an enormous challenge for all men especially is to relax that, you know. And the thing is, you can't really relax the body until you relax the head, the mind, and kind of ease up on that idea. And that is a huge obstacle for many men, and some men, you know, can never relax basically because they cannot let go of that, you know, deeply conditioned impulse, you know, like tighten up, lock up, right, be strong.
Mike, if you don't mind, Kat is here. She's taken over the public classes of Master Zhang in the park. I wonder if we could be good enough to allow women to express themselves. Kat, what has been your experience as a woman teaching and teaching women? What are we missing? What should we be more focused on?
That's a great question. Can you hear me?
Who was the first woman to go to Master Zhang and say, hey, how come women aren't disciples also? And she has the greatest, oh my God, she had a comic book with a guy like Master Fung, Master Zhang, with all his foibles and uniqueness. But Kat, I don't mean to be talking too much. I was wondering if you can maybe give us your insight on some of these thoughts.
Okay, am I coming through? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, great. Okay. I've just gone into very experiential practice of Tai Chi. I practice in the morning in the park with the birds, and I see what comes up. My inner teacher comes up, and I practice mostly the 83, and through the 83. I feel I get the Qigong benefits. I feel the Qigong, I feel the Danshan, I feel the Qi moving, I feel the things Master Zhang taught me was he taught me how to move the Danshan, how to move from center, and he corrected every single move. We worked exclusively for 30 years on the 83, a little under 24. I had lessons with him for like 30 years every week. And we never did much martial arts at all, except the applications. And I think of it's like drunk Tai Chi. You know, you move and you hit someone and you move because you're just so loose that just moving your arm, you hit someone because it's really you're hitting them from your center because you're drunk. And I feel like with the Tai Chi, the martial arts comes up. If you're moving from center and you're relaxed and you're connected, your martial arts is fine. But I'm much more into Qigong and in a heart-centered method. I feel like along, as you talked, I'm glad to see that you were talking about moving from the heart. And I've noticed it feels like the turning of the waist from the heart maybe it works better. The turning, the Danshan is related more to the bubbling springs of my feet. But as I practice,
But it's a woman's cycle.
Pardon me.
It's also related to a woman's cycle.
What is?
You have not cultivating women, not necessarily always cultivating in the middle dantian.
That makes sense. Along with the trying to get the moves from center and feeling the chi, I'm really trying to feel nature around me and keep my heart open. And I feel like mouth Tai Chi is keeping your smile. That's very hard. It's very hard to keep a relaxed mouth when you're focused on doing the form correctly.
Kat, how long have you been doing Tai Chi?
my first class was in 373, and I did Yang style non-king integrated form for about 18 years, and I discovered Master John, and he said, "You have no inside." I said, "I've been doing it 18 years. What the heck are you talking about?" And he disabused me of the notion very quickly that I had no inside, and I thought, "Oh my gosh!" But I had a kind of hippie teacher, and he was very connected to nature and in a more spiritual element. And I think bringing that to Master Zhang's more martial thing was very beneficial. It was, and
May I ask your tender age?
yeah, 83.
So I think that you have accomplished what Michael was talking about, is you spend years and years doing the cultivation, doing the standing, doing the Chanzichin, and you know, Zhang was the person who introduced Chanzichin to America. And then finally it's there, and then your form becomes the expression of all of that. I think that's a high level of accomplishment.
Yeah, and for me, I'm the evidence. Because every time I push hand with a cat, I learn the most. She has the best energy of all the John's class. She has the most rounded, soft energy, and feel in every corner. And he's just wonderful to push hand with. Yeah, and I agree. She has zero interest in martial arts, but for me, as a martial arts interest guy, I learned a lot from her just by absorbing the energy.
But then it still goes back to what Michael's saying, which is the ultimate. Open the door. Sorry. My wife.
Oh, I have a confession to make.
Okay.
I do very little basics. I do about 15 minutes of Qigong. I focus on the 83, very small amount of 83. I do that almost, I learned through the 83, and I went to Qigong through the 83.
You know, that's what Michael is kind of saying. I mean, you don't have to justify it by the martial arts. That might actually be the wrong way. It would hold you back. You know, at a certain point, why do people do calligraphy? Why do they do anything? You know, to be alive, to take something, self-cultivation. That's the essence of all Chinese philosophy. Whatever I'm doing, not today, but in the old days, self-cultivation. How do I become a better person? And whether you're doing calligraphy or whether you're doing Tai Chi, you're continually investing in your own awareness of your own self-cultivation, and at the same time allowing the spiritual. I mean, if you're always focused on martial accomplishment, you miss the whole ball of wax. Eventually you're going to be old, and if you haven't woken to the fact that we're spiritual beings, you may have to come back and do it all over again.
There's a Hafiz poem that I like. I was looking for it. I can't find it that fast. But the essence is that you may have to knock your lips against the cup of nectar a million times before you actually get a sip. And I think of that, you know, trying to really sense the essence of your connection, and it's a wonderful journey. You're never going to quite find it.
Look who's here. Come over here. My lovely wife, my child bride. She's got her mask on. She's social distancing, and we're going to have fun a little bit. We're just hanging out with everybody. And Nick, you have done not just. We're not just talking about women. Nick has devoted so much of her time and attention to caring for others, whether it be people who are suffering from cancer, or people who are in difficult straits, particularly women. She had classes up in Bisbee, Arizona. Can you talk a little bit about what your practice was and how it was affected by your femininity or whatever?
That's a very interesting question, considering that you were my teacher.
Never mind.
Time. And then Master Zhang is my shifu, who beat me up all the time. That's kind of hard.
But you took the art in another direction. I mean, you work with. Tell what are the groups that you work with that you gave of yourself freely about? terrible.
I went to, when I was in Arizona, I was teaching women in a rehabilitation center. So it was a house for women with domestic violence issues and their children and drug issues. So I was teaching the women and their children whatever they really needed. We did a lot of Qigong. We did some Tai Chi. It's hard to teach drug addicts Tai Chi though because they have no focus. But they can follow Qigong and they can tell you whether they want to tell you or not. You can see the difference upon them almost immediately. So whether they understand it or not, the movement of Qigong itself was transcending these people and their little kids.
In and of itself, the art has so much to give. It's so rich. I gotta ask one thing. All right, there are two people I know who can imitate Master Zhang. Now, this is just from. All right, we're not going to talk about it much. One of them is Mark Becker from Colorado. He has been studying with Master Zhang for quite a time, and what was funny is Master Zhang. The last time we saw Master Zhang was about a year ago, and remember, Mike, you were all at Master Zhang's house, and Mark was with us, and he hadn't become a disciple. At this point in time, Zhang was almost just ready to get on the plane and go home, but he remembered Mark, and in the middle, just before we left, he did a discipleship ceremony for Mark. Now, he's also an actor. He also makes jewelry, but this is just between us. And don't use any bad words. You give us a little bit of Master Zhang.
Ma. Why are you doing? All right, Ma. Why you look at Florida? No, you look down. No good. You have no money. But listen, I want to, Michael, thank you so much for this is so phenomenal. I'm enjoying this so much, and Dustin, you guys, I mean, what a great interview. This is
I do this all the time. My feeling is this is what I'd want to do anyway. Meet you guys in a cafe or a restaurant or more like a bar and just sit around, talk stuff, and share. Everybody has something to share, and as a group, we kind of owe it to our system, Master Fung and Master Zhang, to continue to reinforce each other's journey and to cultivate our own art. I mean, Michael, you had so much to say. It's going to affect the way I practice. I really feel that Michael sees what the difference is and what the what the advantage is to Fung Zichan's approach. And I want to ask him about everything. I've got more questions. Anybody else want to say anything?
I just have one question about the standing. Because Michael, you were talking about the side to side. I don't do much standing. However, I do Buddhist Tibetan meditation and the monkey mind, everything you were talking about. But you were talking about the standing and going from side to side. Is there also a front back or a diagonal or a circle? Can you just be a little more specific on that?
No, the way Master Fung always went side to side, and what that was, like I said, is essentially there's a gong that's called balancing the yin yang energy. So it's one of the initial ways. I mean, the gong introduces you to this idea of substantial, insubstantial, yin yang, right? So in every posture, you want to strive for a balance of yin and yang, and that achieves then central equilibrium or balance. So one of the initial gong exercises is you just stand in that, like the position that you would be in when you start the form, and you shift all of the weight onto the left foot, and that whole side of your body relaxes and sinks, and that whole half of your body becomes substantial or full. the other half of your body becomes insubstantial or empty. So the full side is the yang side, the empty side is the yin side. So what that exercise does is by simply moving your chi back and forth, back and forth, back and forth helps open up some of the blocked channels, because a lot of this whole process of the gong is like a kind of dredging process, because when you're born, you're vibrant, you are, assuming you're a healthy child, and all of your pathways are open, because the Hanyuan Qigong is, based on the channels and meridians of traditional Chinese medicine. Now, it goes beyond that, and so you create new pathways and pathways that have a martial application. But the yin-yang balancing is just that, just constantly shifting your weight and relaxing completely as you do it, and it's relaxing and sinking. So those need to both occur, and they're very much related, because when you can only sink if you do relax. So Master Fung would often do that when he was standing, but it's always left to right, because
from side
right.
So the Fung Sung exercises are really all about that. Michael, there's been lots of variation on what the term Hanyuan means. Can we ask you to give us your thought on the subject? I have my own thoughts.
Right. It's it is translated like a lot of homonyms in Chinese. Has multiple definitions, but one of the best definitions that I've heard is like a mixing of qi. So Yuan is round, but Yuan is also like Yuan qi is original qi. So that's the inheritance from your parents, your genetic inheritance. That can be nurtured and sustained by gathering qi from what you eat, what you drink, and through the breath. And the breath, though, is the more effective way of doing that. So there are many gong exercises for gathering qi to kind of mix with the yuan qi, the original qi. Also, if you look at in traditional Chinese medicine, you have all these meridians and pathways, and there is a cycle for energy to move through this whole system. So that's kind of foundational to this. But like I say, we're doing something else too, because we want to gather, unify, mix all these energies up, and then express them martially. So we create pathways for doing that.
Myself,
Pardon?
I have my own interpretation. You have the Yang style, the Chen style, the Wu style, style after style. And Fung never wanted anybody to call his art the Fung style. He said, if you do that, you're personally. I think that there was kind of like a little political payback. What Master Fung said is, we know where the art came from. It came from Chen Ting. We read his reminiscences after they got ran out of town by the Manchus. He said before there was Tai Chi, it just didn't develop out of a tree. You had Chi Guan's book that basically talked about 16 different martial arts and took the best of all of them, used for training soldiers. So in that respect, from a martial point of view, it wasn't unique. It was a collection of all the greatest martial arts known at the time. He also studied what was the Taoist book, What was it?
Tao Te Ching.
No, the Yellow Emperors. Oh, well, this was a really original Taoist book that actually was written by a woman. And then you had the traditional Chinese medical theory of, the various pathways through the body. I think what Fung was saying is, look, you guys are all talking about Yang and Chen and all this other stuff, and you're missing the point. If you go back and research the richness of Chinese culture, you have the greatest martial arts all brought together in one form. You have the unique insight of actually internal and external can also refer to. Internal is Taoism. Buddhism came from India, so that's external. But you have your own, I won't call it a religion, spiritual belief system in Taoism. And then you have your own understanding of how the qi it flows in the body, and the movements are designed to continue to move the qi through the body. And I think politically he was saying is, look, you guys are all talking about your style. In the Da Dao, the big Dao, he always talks about the big Dao, where there are no distinctions. The essence was, this is where Tai Chi came from. So my art, the HunYuan, is the original form of Tai Chi. Sorry. That's my opinion.
Michael, can you repeat what you said earlier in the beginning? Something about all, when it all becomes one. I think it was like Yi Dao, Qi Dao, and then you said something.
Li Dao, Fang Fa Dao. So, in Yi, which is intention, the intention moves the qi moves the body does the technique.
So what are those characters? What's the Chinese?
Yes, Chinese, but I can't tell you what characters. I mean,
No. I mean, just repeat it. It's Yi Dao.
Yi Dao. Well, the expression though that I used. I mean, the sequence that I gave you is the kind of command sequence that is true of anything you do, right? I mean, if I reach for a glass of water, it's because first I had this intention to do that, right? And in the theory of martial arts, which is shared with traditional Chinese medicine, well, that intention mobilizes the energy moves the body does what it's does the technique. But this other level I was talking about, which was Yi Dao, Qi Dao, Li Dao, Feng Fa Dao, that means the mind, the energy, the body, the technique all arrive at the same time.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I one time thought I understood Chen Xiang saying is that you move the body and the qi follows, just like water in a bottle. I was shocked by that. Do you have anything to say about that? I'm glad you brought that up, because like people look at what Chen Xiang does, they look at Master Fung does, and they think, wow, he's really kind of gone off on a thing. But in fact, there's no daylight between them in the aspects that both of them consider the most important, which is the gong. So I think what you're talking about, because, the goal is we want all of this to be orchestrated by the mind, and we want the quality of the mind to be kind of upgraded to do a better job of this, right? So mind moves the energy moves the body, and you're saying, well, Chen Xiang is maybe teaching a form, or maybe, the Tai Chi Bong, and he's saying the body is leading and the energy is following the body, right? But see, that's a training device. That's to get those elements unified. So in a lot of the gong, it's the same thing, like the cleansing gong, where you're imagining your hands coming down and the qi is like following the hands, going down through the body and all this. So the gestures are facilitating the process of developing that ability.
But ultimately, what you're trying to do is to, the mind is the commander. The mind is the commander. So, and it's the intention. That's why when you practice the gong, Master Fung used to say it's fine, you can pay attention to synchronizing the breath with the movement, and you can, focus on the chi and certain exercise and all this. When you do the form, you should not do that. When you do the form, you should focus just on the the intention. Because when you if you repeatedly put your attention somewhere, your chi will eventually, and you're also relaxing and you're aligned and everything else. Your intention goes out to your hand over time, then your chi goes out to your hand, and that's the kind of process of developing those skills. So, but it is true. Like if you're learning the gong, you can say, well, okay, you circle this and your body's turning, and then relax and just let your chi follow that movement. But like I said, that's a training device or method.
Michael, while we're on the subject, how do you talk about the difference between the Ilu and the Arlu, the 83 and the 71, first form and the second? What is the way in which the second form is in any way different from the first form?
Okay, well, I would say there was more difference in the past than there is now. Certainly more difference in like the Chin village tradition than in the HunYuan practice. But basically, Ilu can be considered like the mother code, for pretty much everything in this whole system is embedded in the Ilu. The Arlu moves closer to a martial application. So the Ilu was more foundational, and people would learn that first, and then they learn the Arlu. So what you start to get in the Arlu is Fajing, expressing force. You have more dynamic steps. So in the Ilu, a lot of it is fixed steps, because you're practicing the weight shift and, shifting from one leg to another. In the Arlu, you start to notice more and more your feet are closer together, which is more the way they would be in an actual fighting situation. And the weight is more clearly, almost always on one foot at the time when you're expressing force. So, and
some people say the Arlu is just the Ilu with adding speed. Other people say there's a qualitative difference. The hands lead the movement.
Well, the technique, there are different techniques. So, like if you look at the techniques, they are closer to the appearance of like how you would use them in fighting. So
Zhou Hua said that the Arlu was the original form. It came from the Shaolin Temple, and you could see the stamping and a lot of the techniques. And that was the original form, and the Ilu was the higher level of practice. Oftentimes in the Chen village, you see kids practicing the Arlu because they're young. It's a lot more exciting and so forth. The Ilu is much more cultivated.
This, the problem with the history, there's all this what they call wild history, right? So there's there are very few records. So most of these, histories were kept in the oral tradition, complete with a lot of distortions and embellishments. But like originally the Chen family, like my understanding is like Pao Chui, Cannon Fist, was essentially their original system. And then when it was modified to become what later was called Tai Chi, then you had, some of these other elements in. Now, where exactly that came from, is very much debated. And I think it's impossible to ever know that with any certainty, because like
it's clear that the Chen village and the Shaolin Temple were within a day's travel of each other.
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
It would be unbelievable to say that they didn't have influence. You see the horse stance that's used in the Chen style.
Yeah.
It really seems like the Chen style had a Shaolin connection in some way.
Oh, I think there's no doubt about that, and that's the thing, where if you are trying to look at this historically, in terms of where there is a verifiable historical record, it all goes back to Chen style, because we know that first there was Chen style, then there was Yang style, then there was Wu style, Ho style, other styles. But what's much less clear, and there's a lot of room for debate, is, well, was there something else? What is, like, certainly all the elements that came to be known as Chen Tai Chi, most of them pre-existed, and certainly there was this long tradition of Qigong practiced for health, and this whole idea of guiding the energy with the mind, that was around for a very long time, of coordinating movement with the breath. So these elements kind of congealed into Chen style, but some people say, well, there's this original Tai Chi that goes back to Fung and all this stuff. Well, it's hard it's hard to know.
There's a really good book, Tai Chi Ancestors, that goes into some of the variations that existed before Tai Chi, where we think Tai Chi, the soft overcomes the hard.
Right.
The first part is Chi Chi Guans, but there was also kind of a Wudan kind of influence.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting how many things went into Tai Chi to begin with.
Yeah.
One other thing I'd like to recommend to people is Mark Chen's book, Chen Style Tai Chi. Is fascinating about history, and it also talks about the history of how Chen style got started, how it was preserved, and how it was continued, and a little bit more information. Actually, the information is interesting. I mean, it's much more martial. They talk about dodging and throwing, and it's obvious that the form in and of itself is not enough. And then what Mark Chen was saying, it's just like music. You play the notes, you can play a little chopsticks or something, but that doesn't put you on a concert stage with other people. You have to have training in, if it's fighting. What about auxiliary equipment for? We use heavy bags probably more often, but Chen style had the long pole. It had the short stick, whether it's bent or not. It had the ball. In other words, supplementary training equipment.
You mean, did they use those? Or
Yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah, and other things too. Like pads and bags, and I mean that's the thing. It's there's this whole thing about, well, is Tai Chi, can Tai Chi people fight or whatever, or you have these MMA guys going out and beating up these old Tai Chi teachers, right? And saying, well, see, they can't fight, they're phony. But the thing is, a lot of it depends on what you want to do with it. So I think if you look at Tai Chi, it has basically all the potential martial techniques. It's got throws, punches, kicks, grappling, joint locks. And back in the day, like in the Chen clan, when they were caravan guards and they were, fighting for their lives, no question, they trained differently, and they would have trained very hard.
Actually, if you look at the first form, which was developed in the 1500s, when people still used cold weapons such as spears and knives and swords, my research has shown that most of the techniques were developed to knock a guy on the ground, as opposed to necessarily hitting, kicking, or punching. Now, it's developed, and I think if it's developed at all, it's been through push hands, practical training, but and sparring. but the original techniques are actually somewhat limited to what you would want to have if you were fighting somebody with a weapon, to get them on the ground and then do whatever you have to do.
Yeah.
A lot of throws and trips and pushes and so forth.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, originally that was, I mean, and a lot of these were like, yeah, military style techniques, and so that not necessarily optimal for personal self defense. But like I say, so like the outcome, especially with Tai Chi, I think if people, if you want to be a cage fighter, you train to do that. Now, within Tai Chi, there is the information and the knowledge that people could do that. Although, in terms of the higher teachings of the better, the higher level masters, including Master Fung, he would have considered that a kind of extravagant waste of your health and well-being, right? Because if you're going to do that, you're going to, you're going to, I mean, end up hurting other people, hurting yourself, and so, that was not considered the highest road to take. But but in terms of the toolbox, it's got all of the tools you need to do pretty much what you want to do.
Looking back on it, are you happy you followed the path of Chen Tai Chi?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Because it felt like a kind of there's a certain logic to it. I mean, if I look back over my whole my whole involvement in martial arts, I mean, I feel like I spent a lot of time circling the airport. I took a kind of slow, meandering route. But
which makes it so much more precious when you finally.
I think it does. I think it does. Because that's the thing, and I've seen it like with, hanging out with Master Fung for more than 5 years in China, and lots of people coming through and watching him teach lots of people. And Chen Qiang is like, you realize, they're throwing out pearls. They're giving everybody the same information, but a lot of people just aren't ready to absorb it, and so the things that, but I wish, I mean, if I had access to someone of their level as a teacher when I was young and had listened, I would have progressed a lot faster and gone a lot further, no question about it.
Which is why we're so excited to be able to sit with you tonight and enjoy the richness of your experience.